You've been focusing only on price all this time, but the market moves on time equations. In this session, you will learn how to identify the timing of market reversals using some of the most powerful Gann Astro trading methods. The methods used by Gann himself. So watch this Gann Astro lesson until the end and take notes. Gann Astro Harmonic Aspect Model. Gann Astro Planetary Longitude Mapping Technique. Gann Astro Eclipse Anchor Timing Model. Here is a financial disclaimer. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial or investment advice. Trading involves risk, and you may lose capital. Always do your own research before making any financial decisions. Let's start with time. What if the problem is not the market, but how we look at time? Because right now, time feels like something that just passes. But what if time actually has structure? What if every moment has a position, just like price does? Gann believed time is the cause and price is the effect. So if that is true, then shouldn't certain moments matter more than others? Think about this carefully. Anything that repeats can be mapped into a cycle. And any cycle completes 360 degrees. 360 degrees equals one cycle. So now ask yourself, if time is repeating, are we really moving forward or just moving through positions on a circle? Now, take it one step deeper. Think about this. If something moves through a cycle, its position must change with time. Theta equals omega multiplied by time. So now the thought changes slightly. If time defines angle, then time is not just passing, it is moving through geometry. Now, imagine two planets moving. Both are following their own cycles. At some point, they form a specific angle between them. We can write that difference like this. Delta theta equals the absolute value of theta 1 minus theta 2. So now the question becomes, is that just a coincidence? Or is that a mathematically defined moment? Because if that angle is fixed, then the timing of that angle is also fixed. 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees. So now think, when two planets hit 90 degrees, did that just happen, or was that moment always going to occur? Let's slow down here. A 90-degree angle is not random. It is exactly 1/4 of a full cycle. 360 degrees divided by 90 degrees equals 4. So when that angle forms, you're not just seeing an event, you are seeing a stage of completion in time. Now think about cycles in general. Where do things usually change at the beginning? At the end? Or somewhere in between? Because halfway points, quarter points, these are where systems tend to shift. So now think, what might happen when time reaches those exact fractions? Now here is where it gets interesting. If a certain angle appears once, it will appear again. Theta at time 1 equals theta at time 2. Because cycles repeat. So if the system returns to the same angle, has it not returned to the same condition? And if the condition is the same, should the behavior also repeat? Now, let me bring this into the market. Markets move because people act. And people do not act randomly. They react in patterns. So if timing patterns repeat, could reactions also start aligning with those moments? On 2nd March 2026, there are two key aspects forming within a short time span. Moon square Uranus and Moon opposition Mars, 180 degrees. Both aspects involve the Moon, which moves quickly and often acts as a timing trigger. So this is not a single isolated alignment. It is a combination of aspects forming sequentially, creating a defined timing window. Each aspect represents the angle between two planets. It is simply the difference between where the Moon is and where another planet is. Now, notice the pattern. A square happens at 90 degrees, which is 1/4 of a full cycle. Opposition happens at 180 degrees, which is 1/2 of a full cycle. So these are not random positions. They are exact fractions of a complete cycle. Once the angle is known, the timing can be calculated. Because time is simply the result of motion, and motion is defined by how fast these planets move relative to each other. Now look at the actual data. The Moon forms a square with Uranus at approximately 3:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Later, it forms opposition with Mars at approximately 7:27 a.m. So this is not a single point in time. It is a window created by multiple angular events unfolding in sequence. These exact timestamps are projected onto the chart of silver as vertical markers. No indicators are required. Only time derived from angular motion. At this stage, the focus is simple. Observe how price behaves as it enters this timing window. As price approaches this period, the market is still moving upward. Structure appears intact. Momentum is still present. There is no immediate signal from price alone that a shift is about to occur. As the first aspect forms, momentum begins to slow. By the time the second aspect completes, the structure changes. Price stops advancing and then begins to move in the opposite direction. The reaction develops within the time window defined by the aspects. So the idea becomes clear. Planetary aspects are being used as mathematical timing tools based on angular motion. And when these timings are projected onto the chart, they begin to highlight moments where the market is more likely to react. Now, this idea of using planetary motion to track time is not something new. Long before modern markets existed, people were already using the sky to measure cycles. Because if something moves in a consistent pattern, it becomes a natural clock, and planetary motion is one of the most consistent motions we have. When looked at structurally, astrology is not about prediction. It is about tracking position within cycles. Each planet moves along a fixed path. Each completes its cycle in a defined period. So instead of thinking in dates and hours, time can be expressed as angular position, which means astrology, at its core, is simply a way of measuring where we are inside repeating time cycles. Even the way we measure time today comes directly from these cycles. A year is based on the Earth's movement around the sun. A month comes from the moon cycle. Days are defined by Earth's rotation. So the calendar itself is not independent. It is built entirely from planetary motion, which means when we say time, we are already referring to movement in the sky. Gann took this one step further. Instead of using planetary motion only to measure time, he used it to analyze timing within markets. Because if time is structured and markets move within time, then markets must also respond to that structure. So for Gann, astrology was not belief. It was a framework for understanding time cycles. In Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 states, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years." Now look at this carefully. The description is very precise. It does not describe celestial bodies as random objects. It defines their function in relation to time and cycles. Days, years, seasons, all of these are measures of time, which means time itself is being defined through the motion of these bodies. So when we track planetary movement, we are not stepping outside the concept of time. We are working directly with the system that defines it. And once time is understood as something structured, it becomes possible to identify moments where that structure reaches specific positions. That is where this approach begins. Not from belief, but from observing how time is measured and how that measurement repeats. Now, planetary aspects are not limited to just one or two angles. They exist across a range of divisions within the full 360-degree cycle. Each division represents a different way in which the cycle can be structured. So instead of seeing aspects as isolated events, they can be viewed as different stages of separation within a continuous system. Some angles divide the cycle into equal and simple parts. 180 degrees divides the circle into two. 120 degrees divides it into three. 90 degrees divides it into four. 60 degrees divides it into six. Each of these creates a symmetrical structure. Planetary motion does not jump from one aspect to another. It moves continuously, which means all these angular relationships are formed as part of an ongoing progression. So what we are observing is not separate events, but specific checkpoints within continuous motion. These are the aspects: conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition. Let's study it one by one. When two planets reach the same position, something important happens. Their angular difference becomes zero. Delta theta equals 0 degrees. This is called a conjunction. Both cycles meet at the same point. There is no separation, only overlap. From a structural perspective, this marks the beginning of a new cycle. On 17 March 2026, The moon forms a sequence of conjunctions with multiple planets within a short span of time. From the transit data, the moon aligns with Mercury and Mars, with exact conjunction timings occurring around 11:24 a.m. and later near 4:46 p.m. In each case, the angular separation becomes zero, which means the moon and the respective planet occupy the same position in the cycle. Because the moon is the fastest moving body here, it passes through these planets one after another, creating a cluster of conjunctions rather than a single isolated alignment. This results in a tightly packed timing window defined purely by overlapping angular positions. When these conjunction times are projected onto the silver chart, the reaction develops within that same window. Price approaches the timing zone with no immediate indication of reversal, maintaining its existing structure. However, as the moon completes its conjunction sequence with Mercury and Mars, the market begins to shift, momentum fades, structure weakens, and a downward move follows shortly after. When a separation reaches half the cycle, something shifts. The angular difference becomes 180 degrees. This is an opposition. Now, the two planets stand on opposite ends of the circle. There is balance, but also tension between extremes. This is the midpoint of the cycle. On 31st March 2026, at around 9:20 a.m., a Moon-Mars opposition is formed. This represents the midpoint of a full 360-degree cycle. At this point, the separation between the Moon and Mars is at its maximum, creating a condition where the cycle reaches a state of balance, but also tension between two opposing positions. When this exact timing is projected onto the silver chart, the market is seen moving upward into the aspect. Price is trending higher with strength, and there is no immediate sign of weakness before the timing point. However, as the market reaches the exact moment of the opposition, the structure begins to retrace. The upward movement slows, momentum stabilizes, and shortly after, the market stops advancing and transitions into consolidation, then creates a low and continue to go upwards. Now moving forward, we reach 1/4 of the cycle, where the angular difference becomes 90 degrees. This is known as a square. At this stage, the system is no longer aligned and not yet balanced. It exists in a transitional state. That is why this angle often corresponds to structural shifts within the cycle. On 2nd April 2026, at 4:54 a.m., the moon forms a square with Jupiter, creating a 90-degree angular separation. This places the system at 1/4 of its cycle, where the two planetary motions are no longer aligned, but also not fully separated. It is a point where the cycle is progressing through a structural shift rather than stability, and this moment is calculated purely from their relative motion. When this timing is applied to the silver chart, price is seen rising into the aspect, building a short upward move after the earlier decline. However, as the exact time is reached, the advance loses strength. The candles begin to compress, and the upward push fails to extend further. From that point onward, the market turns back down and continues lower. The change in behavior develops around the calculated time window. This is showing how this quarter-cycle position corresponds to a phase where momentum transitions and direction often changes. A trine occurs when the separation between two planets reaches 1/3 of the cycle. At this point, the angular difference becomes 120 degrees. This divides the circle into 3 equal parts. Structurally, this represents a more stable distribution rather than tension within the cycle. On April 3, 2026, at approximately 7:28 a.m., Mercury and Jupiter form a trine, creating a 120-degree separation between them. This places the system at 1/3 of the full cycle, a position where the angular relationship is evenly distributed rather than compressed or stretched. It is a point where the cycle reaches a structured phase, defined purely by the geometry of motion between the two planets. When this exact timing is marked on the silver chart, price is already moving upward into the level, building a steady rise. As the market reaches the timing point, the advance begins to lose strength. The candles stop expanding, the move pauses, and a local high forms around that area. From there, the direction changes and the market begins to move lower, eventually accelerating into a stronger decline. The shift develops around the same moment defined by the trine, showing how this position in the cycle can coincide with the completion of a move and the beginning of a new phase. Now moving forward, at 1/6 of the cycle, the angle becomes 60 degrees. This is called a sextile. It is a smaller division, but still part of the same structural system. Even at this level, the relationship remains mathematically defined. On 8 April 2026, at approximately 12:11 p.m., Mars and Uranus reach a sextile, forming a 60-degree separation between them. This places the system at 1/6 of the full cycle, a smaller division, but still a clearly defined position created by their relative motion. It is not a point of alignment or opposition, but a stage where the cycle passes through an intermediate structure. When this moment is marked on the silver chart, price is already trending downward before the timing is reached. As the market enters the exact time window, the decline briefly slows and forms a short pause. The candles compress, and the move stabilizes for a moment. However, this pause does not reverse the trend. Shortly after, the downward movement continues, extending further in the same direction. The behavior develops around the calculated time, showing how this type of aspect can correspond to a temporary pause within an ongoing move, rather than a full reversal. Now, moving forward, the framework changes. Up to this point, timing was derived from the relative motion between two planets. Here, that dependency is removed. The focus shifts to a single moving body and its progression within a closed circular system. So instead of interaction, we will study position over time within one cycle. Any planet moving around the zodiac follows a periodic path. Mathematically, this can be treated as a function of time. Theta as a function of time equals omega multiplied by time plus the initial angle. Where theta of time represents position at time t, omega represents angular velocity, and the initial angle represents the starting position. This shows that motion is continuous, predictable, and fully determined once the starting position is known. At any chosen moment, such as a market high or low, the planet has a fixed angular position. This position becomes the reference point. From here, all future movement is measured relative to this point. So instead of tracking absolute position, we track displacement from the origin. The movement from the reference point is defined as angular displacement. This is calculated as the current position minus the initial position. In other words, it measures how far the planet has moved from where it started. This transforms planetary motion into a measurable variable. So instead of tracking time, we track how many degrees the planet has moved within its cycle. Because the system is circular, a movement of 360 degrees brings the planet back to the same position. In mathematical terms, position at time t plus the period is equal to position at time t. Here, the period represents the time required to complete one full cycle. So 360 degrees is a full cycle, 180 degrees is half a cycle, 90 degrees is a quarter cycle, and 270 degrees is 3/4 of a cycle. Each of these angular levels defines a stage within the cycle. 90 degrees represents a point of structural imbalance. 180 degrees represents the maximum distance from the starting point. 270 degrees represents the beginning of the return phase. 360 degrees represents full cycle completion and reset. Since motion is uniform, angle and time move together. Time is simply the result of angular displacement and velocity. This means every angle points to a specific moment in time. So instead of measuring time as something that passes, we measure when the planet reaches a precise position. Now moving forward, the distinction becomes clear. Aspects are based on the difference between two planets. This method is based on the movement of one planet from a reference point. So instead of relative geometry, we are working with absolute cyclic progression. The process begins by selecting a reference point on the chart. This is typically a clear swing high or swing low. At that moment, the planet occupies a specific position within its cycle. This position becomes fixed and serves as the starting point. From here, we define the initial angle as the planet's position at that swing point. This is then treated as 0 degrees. From this point onward, we only track how far the planet moves forward. In simple terms, movement is the current position minus the starting position. This tells us exactly how many degrees the planet has moved since the swing point. We will concentrate only on key structural levels. 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and 360 degrees. Since the speed of the planet is known, each angular level can be translated into a specific time. This is done by dividing angular displacement by angular velocity. In other words, once we know how far the planet needs to move and how fast it is moving, we can determine the exact timing. Plot the calculated times on the chart. Each angle becomes a vertical marker. As price approaches these time points, we focus on observation, not prediction. We look for slowdown, acceleration, reversal, or continuation. Let's look at the charts now. In this example, we are observing crude oil chart on the daily time frame. A clear swing high is selected on 28 September 2023. This becomes the reference point and is treated as 0 degrees. From here, every future movement of the moon is measured relative to this value. To calculate future positions, I use my own Gann Astro software, which I have personally developed. Manual calculation is not required here, as the software performs these calculations automatically. It tracks planetary longitude on a daily basis and determines when the planet reaches specific angular displacements. In this example, the start date is 28 September 2023. The planet we are observing is the moon, and we track its movement forward through angular progression. This tool is not publicly available. It is shared only with serious learners inside my private teachings, free of cost under a strict NDA, because the real edge comes from precision in calculation and execution. From the selected reference point, the moon reaches 90 degrees of angular displacement on 6 October 2023. This date is plotted on the chart. As price approaches this time, the market is already in a downward move. At the exact timing, price forms a local low and begins to react upward. At the next stage, the moon reaches 180 degrees of angular displacement on 12 October 2023. This represents the half-cycle position. On the chart, price reacts again near this timing. A higher low is formed, followed by an upward attempt. Then the moon reaches 270 degrees of displacement on 19 October 2023. Now the system enters the three-quarter phase. On the chart, price moves upward into this timing. A local high forms near this point, and the upward move begins to stall and weaken. This is where the cycle transitions from expansion back toward completion. Finally, the moon completes a full cycle on 26 October 2023 at 360 degrees. This brings the system back to its original position. On the chart, price reacts again near this timing. A clear rejection forms at the top, and the market then moves into a strong downward trend. This marks a full cycle reset, where the previous structure completes and a new phase begins. Now, look at the sequence. 90 degrees marks a reaction low. 180 degrees shows stabilization. 270 degrees forms a local high. 360 degrees leads to a major reversal. Each level corresponds to a specific phase of the cycle. And most importantly, all these dates were calculated in advance, not derived after price moved. As you have seen in my software, there are two options available, geo and helio. Now let me explain what this actually means. Every measurement in astronomy is based on a reference point. When we say a planet is at a certain degree, that value is always measured relative to something. So the real question is not where the planet is, but from where it is being observed. In the geocentric system, planetary positions are measured relative to Earth. Earth is treated as the center of observation. In simple terms, position is calculated as the planet's position minus the Earth's position. This means we are measuring motion relative to Earth, not absolute motion. Since Earth itself is moving, this changes how planetary motion appears. Planets may slow down, speed up, or even appear to move backward. This effect is called apparent motion. In the heliocentric system, planetary positions are measured relative to the Sun. The Sun is treated as the center with all planets, including Earth, orbiting around it. In this case, position directly reflects the planet's true motion. There is no distortion caused by Earth's movement. As a result, motion is continuous, there is no retrograde, and angular progression remains smooth. The difference is not small. It is structural. Geocentric is relative motion, measured as the planet in relation to Earth. Heliocentric is absolute motion, measured as the planet in its orbit. So the same planet, at the same moment in time, will have different angular values depending on the chosen frame. Since the method is based on angles, this difference directly affects timing. In the geocentric model, angular movement is irregular. In the heliocentric model, angular movement is uniform. Now, let us look at another example. We observe the Bitcoin US dollar chart on the daily time frame, this time using heliocentric Mercury. A clear swing high is selected on 14 March 2024. At that moment, Mercury's position is recorded using my Gann Astro software. This position becomes the reference point and is treated as 0 degrees. From the reference point, Mercury completes a 90-degree move on 30 March 2024. Now look at Bitcoin. As price moves into this timing, a local high forms. The upward move begins to slow and stall. This is the quarter cycle point where momentum starts to shift. Next, Mercury reaches 180 degrees on 23 April 2024. On the chart, Bitcoin approaches this timing during a recovery phase. Around this level, price shows a clear rejection and fails to push higher. This corresponds to the midpoint of the cycle, where structure stabilizes and begins to shift direction. At this stage, Mercury reaches 270 degrees of angular displacement on 23 May 2024. On the Bitcoin chart, price moves upward into this timing. A strong local top forms near this level, followed by a downward reversal. This behavior is consistent with the three-quarter phase of the cycle, where the structure transitions from expansion into decline. Mercury completes 360 degrees of angular displacement on 10 July 2024. On the Bitcoin chart, price is moving downward as it approaches this timing. Near this point, a clear swing low forms, followed by a reversal. This behavior is consistent with full cycle completion, where the structure resets to its original position. Now look at how the sequence unfolds. 0 degrees marks the starting point at the swing high. 90 degrees brings a local high and slowdown. 180 degrees shows rejection. 270 degrees forms a major top. 360 degrees completes the cycle with a swing low and reversal. Each level reflects a defined phase within the cycle. The dates shown are not derived from price movements. They are calculated in advance by measuring Mercury's angular displacement from a fixed reference point. This means the chart is not showing prediction, but alignment between time structure and price behavior. Every cyclical system is built on two key components: a reference point and a repeating interval. Without a reference point, cycles cannot be measured. Without repetition, time loses its structure. So the first step is to define a moment where the system is synchronized. An eclipse occurs when the sun, moon, and earth align. At the same time, the moon is near a nodal crossing, and the angular relationship becomes precise. This is not a continuous condition. It is a discrete event, which means the system reaches a defined state at a defined time. Mathematically, this acts as the reference state at time t0. Time is continuous by nature. However, measurement requires it to be broken into defined points. So instead of viewing time as a flow, we represent it as a sequence of positions. Time 0, time 1, time 2, time 3, and so on. An eclipse acts as a fixed reference point from which all future measurements can be made. If an input system operates with a period t, the observed system may show a different effective period. The effective period depends on the original period and the conditions of the system. This means the cycle does not always repeat exactly as expected. So rather than looking for exact repetition, we observe a modified cycle length. Let time 1 represent the first observable reaction after time 0. The interval is defined as the difference between time 1 and time 0. This interval is not theoretical, but empirical, meaning it is based on real observation. It captures how the system responds to the initial condition. This approach is valid because it does not assume the system to be periodic. Instead, the process begins by anchoring the system at a known state, observing its response, and then projecting forward based on that observation. As a result, the cycle is not imposed artificially, but derived from actual system behavior. Now, let us see how this can be applied on the chart. In this example, we are observing Ethereum on the daily time frame. We begin by selecting the solar eclipse on 8 April 2024 as the reference event. I have used SolarFire to get the total eclipse date. Now, let us see what we are doing differently. We are not assuming a fixed solar cycle. We are not forcing a fixed duration. Instead, the process is simple. We start with the eclipse as the anchor. We observe the first real reaction as calibration. We extract the cycle as measurement. And then we project forward to define structure. After marking 8 April, we move forward. The first clear reaction appears around 19 April 2024. Now observe what happens at this point. Price moves upward into this timing. Then it begins to stall and reverse. A clear structural shift occurs. Now we measure the interval between 8 April and 19 April. This gives approximately 11 days. This becomes the key. Now we use the projection formula. Time n equals time 0 plus n multiplied by the interval. Where time 0 is 8 April, the interval is 11 days, and n takes values like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, let's go step by step. For time 1, where n equals 1, we add one interval to the starting point. 8 April plus 11 days gives 19 April. For time 2, where n equals 2, we add two intervals. 8 April plus 22 days gives 30 April. Now, continuing step by step. For time 3, where n equals 3, we add three intervals. 8 April plus 33 days gives 11 May. For time 4, where n equals 4, we add four intervals. 8 April plus 44 days gives 22 May. Now, once these dates are calculated, we simply plot vertical lines on each projected time. And this is where it becomes interesting. As these vertical lines are placed on the chart, you can clearly observe that around each line, price is not behaving randomly. Instead, either a top is forming or a bottom is forming, where the market is pausing and changing direction. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that two traders can look at the exact same chart, yet take completely different trades? One sees opportunity, the other sees fear. This tells us something important. Trading is not just about the market. It is about perception, and perception comes from within you. Most traders believe trading happens in the mind, but that is incomplete. Your body is constantly reacting while you trade. Your heartbeat changes, your breathing shifts, your tension increases or relaxes. So trading is not just mental. It is a full body experience. Your body is not isolated. It is part of a larger system. Just like the market flows, your body flows. Just like price expands and contracts, your internal state expands and contracts. If you fight your body, you create resistance. If you understand it, you create alignment. Many traders feel stuck. They feel trapped in fear, hesitation, or overthinking. This happens because they believe they are locked inside their body. But in reality, your state is constantly changing. You're not fixed. You're fluid. And that means your trading behavior can change as well. You have been taught to think of your body like a machine. Input equals output. But trading does not work like that. Your reactions are not mechanical. They are alive. They respond to belief, emotion, and perception. So if your system fails, it is not always the strategy. It is the internal state running it. When you enter a trade, it is not just logic. There is anticipation. There is fear. There is hope. These are not errors. These are signals. Your body is communicating with you. The problem is, most traders ignore these signals. Your thoughts are not separate from your body. Every belief you hold becomes physical. If you believe the market is dangerous, your body tightens. If you believe you are in control, your body stabilizes. So your trading performance is not just strategy. It is embodied belief. Your body is not just carrying you through trades. It is expressing your deeper state. It reacts faster than your conscious mind. That is why sometimes you feel something is wrong before you can explain it. That is intuition working through the body. Think about this. Your body heals itself without your control. It grows without your instruction. So why do you not trust it in trading? The more you trust your natural responses, the less forced your trading becomes. You are not limited to your current emotional state. You can observe it. When you step back and watch your fear instead of becoming it, everything changes. This is the difference between reacting and responding. Your body reflects your inner world. If your thoughts are chaotic, your trading becomes chaotic. If your thoughts are structured, your trading becomes structured. So improving trading is not just learning more setups. It is refining your inner environment. Every thought you repeat becomes stronger. If you constantly think, I will lose this trade, your behavior will align with that. If you think, I execute with clarity, your actions will follow that. Your thoughts are not passive. They are active forces shaping your trades. Every trade you take is reinforcing something, either confidence or doubt. There is no neutral. So the question is, what are you building through repetition? Your mind is not just thinking. It is receiving. It receives signals from your body and deeper signals from intuition. If you only rely on logic, you miss half the information. The best traders integrate both. Intuition is not guessing. It is pattern recognition beyond conscious awareness. It comes from experience, but also comes from alignment. When your mind is quiet, intuition becomes clearer. There is a deeper drive behind trading. It is not just profit. It is expression, growth, expansion. If you disconnect from this, trading becomes stressful. If you connect to it, trading becomes purposeful. Some traders burn out quickly. Others sustain performance for years. The difference is not just skill. It is energy, your love for the process, your connection to what you are doing. This is what sustains you. If your energy is low, even a perfect strategy fails. If your energy is high, even imperfect setups can work. So managing your state is as important as managing risk. You cannot separate thinking, feeling, and acting. They are one system. If one is misaligned, the whole system suffers. But when they align, your execution becomes effortless. Trading is not about controlling the market. It is about understanding yourself. When your inner state becomes stable, your outer results become consistent. So the real edge is not just strategy. It is awareness. The solution is not to fight your emotions, and it is not to eliminate fear completely. The real solution is alignment. You bring your mind, your body, and your intention into the same direction before you act. When you're about to take a trade, you pause for a moment and observe your state. You ask yourself if your decision is coming from clarity or from urgency. If your body feels tense, if your thoughts feel rushed, you do not act. You wait until your state becomes stable. When your breathing is calm, your thoughts are clear, and your intention is steady, then you execute. This is how discipline is built. Now connect this back to what you have seen. The market moves through time. Your decisions also happen in time. So when you align your internal state with specific moments where the market is likely to react, everything changes. Most traders take trades anywhere. No timing, no structure. But now, you're doing something different. You wait. You observe. You act only when time and state align together. That is the shift from random execution to structured decision-making. The real edge is not just strategy. It is not just astrology. It is not just psychology. It is the combination. Time gives you when, structure gives you where, and awareness gives you how. When these three come together, execution becomes clear. So understand this clearly. The market is not random. Time is not random. And your reactions do not have to be random either. When you start observing time and start measuring it and aligning yourself with it, you stop chasing the market and you begin to move with it.